Welcome, everybody. How's your Dreamforce going? Is it good? Yes? Great? All right. So I'm going to talk to you about integrating data with Force.com and Wave Analytics. So my name is Pat Patterson. I'm now the community champion at StreamSets. Actually, until 7 months ago, I was a developer evangelist here at Salesforce. So this is a bit of the knowledge I gained during my 5.5 years with Salesforce, plus a bit that I've learned over the past 6 months or so. You can always get in touch with me by email, pat@streamsets.com, or you can fuel my personality cult by following me on Twitter at Metadaddy. So, how many people in the audience are actually developers? Okay, so there's a few that aren't. So I'm going to start gently with talking about why even APIs? Why do we need them? I'm going to talk about the Force.com APIs. So quite a few of you might have used these already. And I'm going to go on and talk about the Wave APIs. And I can almost guarantee I'm going to talk about something there that you have not used already. And I'm going to show you how I've been working with the APIs over the past few months in bringing it all together, moving data in and out of the platform. Hopefully I'll get time for a few questions and answers. If I don't, this is only a half-hour session. I'll hang around afterwards over there, so you can always grab me, pick up a business card, and I'll be happy to answer whatever questions you have. All right, so why am I even up here? Why APIs? Put simply, APIs give external applications access to the capabilities of a platform. So in this case, the Salesforce platform. So essentially, everything you can do in that browser interface, an application can do on a user's behalf, such as create an account. We'll see that in a few minutes. Now, historically, API means application programming interface. And I'd say over the past 10 years or so, it's really taken on a web focus. When we talk about the Twitter API or the Force.com API, we actually mean an application connecting across the internet and interacting with a platform. And now, it's been several years since Salesforce started talking about taking an API-first approach, implementing functionality first in the APIs for applications to be able to connect and take advantage of it before even putting it in the browser interface. And that's been driven by the rise of mobile apps that are themselves applications integrating with the platform. So, if there's one thing I want you to take away and remember from this session, it's Workbench. How many people have already used Workbench? Okay, good, not enough. Workbench is an essential tool for anybody working with the APIs, and really anybody developing with the platform, because it gives you kind of a little look under the covers. So I'll show you a bit about how to use Workbench. It's on the web. It's at workbench.developerforce.com. And if for some reason you're not happy about using a tool that's hosted up on the web, which would be a bit strange to be unhappy with that if you're using Salesforce, but still, the code is there, the PHP code is there on GitHub if you want to grab it, and you can run it on your own laptop even. So Workbench gives us a way to work with these APIs, and I'm going to start by talking about the Force.com APIs. Now, actually my first task when I came to Salesforce in 2010 was writing the Getting Started guide for the REST API. Now, REST is very developer friendly. It stands for representational state transfer, and all that means is that you're moving the state of, say, an account from your application up into Salesforce or back again. And in REST, URLs are the nouns of the API. Okay, we manipulate resources via these URLs. So the first one up there is an account. So if we just simply do a get on that URL, we get back the representation of an account, and I'll show you in a minute. We can also, as well as getting data, we can get metadata. So through a very similar URL, we can get a description of the account object, all of the standard and custom fields that have been defined. And the reason that REST has taken off as a way of interacting with platforms is that it's a very natural way to work. We have these URLs that are nouns, and the standard HTTP operations are verbs. So we can do create, read, update, delete in terms of post, get, patch, and delete. So we literally just do HTTP operations to take effect on data in the platform. And the payload of the Force.com REST API can be JSON or XML. And that's a little snippet of JSON. I'm curious as to why anybody would bother using XML with the REST API, but you can do it if you really want to. JSON is very brief, where XML is quite wordy. So let's put this to action straight away. So to use Workbench, let me just go to the front page. I happen to be logged into Salesforce already, and all I have to say is, OK, I agree to terms of service. I'm going to use a production environment because I'm using a developer edition rather than a sandbox. I just hit login with Salesforce. I'm into this very kind of terse interface, but I pull down REST Explorer. So this is beautiful. I can immediately start interacting with the API. Now what's happening here is that the Workbench is being my API client for me, but I'm driving it. I'm giving it the URLs, and it's doing the rest of the work, putting in my security token, sending off the request, parsing the response to make it look nice. I can see the raw, that's the raw JSON on the right there. I can see everything that's going on under the covers. Oh, I apologize. It's this crazy PowerPoint. You'd think I'd have maybe done this before or something. I don't know. So we're here in the Workbench. So what I did was I clicked on this REST Explorer. And this is the problem when your slide down there looks like your screen up here. And I can do execute there. And I show the response. I can see the actual, all of the response that came back, all the headers, all the JSON. This is a great way of playing with the API and getting things working. So I can say, let's pick up one of these queries here. Select ID name from account. So, whoops. So I can say, OK, I want to start querying the accounts from my app. I can just do a little dry run here and see what kind of data I get back. I can see exactly what comes back here. And I can even do things like create an account. So if I want to do that, I have to go to a different place. Sosobjects account. And I put in some JSON. So I'm going to create a named account. And it's going to be my new account. And this will actually post that. So I click post, got the right URL, get some payload in JSON. That's going to post that up to Salesforce. It succeeded, success true, there's nothing in errors. And if I go across here and refresh my new accounts this week, then I actually really did just create an account via the API. So this is a beautiful on-ramp to using APIs. And the really cool thing about the REST API is that you effectively need no particular tooling to use it. You can even use it from the command line. Any programming language that can access URLs via HTTP can use the REST API. In fact, there are wrapper libraries to make it a little bit more pleasant, but the great thing is that if you're working from COBOL or something, and you can get an HTTP connection, you can create records and query records in Salesforce. So I can even do that from the command line by saying, let's get one up here. So this is the equivalent of what I just did in Workbench there. So pro tip, if you're working with the REST API, this custom header, x prettyprint:1, makes your results come back much more legibly. So I've got my authorization token here. I put it in a variable, so I didn't have to share it with like 100 of my closest friends. And I've got my JSON payload here. And even from like the command line in shell script, I can create another account here. Drum roll as curl connects to the internet. Come on, this worked 5 minutes ago. Okay. I can set off the process of creating another account from there, and even from the command prompt, that should work. Let's go have a look, see if it did work, and it's just slow. So if we go to accounts, whoa, network, don't do this to me now. All right, let's go for the backup of the Wi-Fi. Conference networks, what can you do? Because it's going to be a very, very... all right. Okay, maybe we won't see as much of that as we want to. Hopefully the network comes back. All right. So we could, in theory, create accounts even from the command line, and what we would be looking for is this same JSON coming back saying it was successful, and we can do all the same operations from any programming language. Now, the pros of the REST API is it's super easy to work with from any language, as long as you've got a network connection. You don't really need a client library. They do exist. The cons are that queries can only return up to 50,000 records. Now, for most situations, that's going to be okay. It's rare that you would write a query that you're expecting more than 50,000 records in the response. You can also only create up to 200 records in a single request using a tree structure. And they can be a list of 200 contacts, say, completely kind of unrelated, or it can be a tree of data. So it could be accounts and contacts and opportunities that you create in one hit. So it's kind of flexible, but it doesn't scale incredibly high. Now, the SOAP API is a little bit more old school. Like I say, the REST API has been around for about 6 years now. The SOAP API several years before that. And with SOAP, you really have to use a client library. Okay, the good news is that they exist for most of the major languages. Java has a supported toolkit called the Web Service Connector. PHP has a force.com toolkit that's on GitHub. It's not supported, but Dave Carroll and his evangelists will be happy to entertain any issues you want to file on it. And there's also C#, VB.NET. There's, I think there's a Python one that Simon Fell wrote. Or the nice thing about SOAP, some would say the one nice thing about SOAP, is that it has a description from which you can generate client code using many kind of enterprise tools. And in the SOAP API, our operations are exposed as methods in your programming language of choice. So we say, I want a new account, so that just creates it in memory on in your app. You set its name, and then you actually say, okay, create that in Salesforce. So it's kind of like a several-step process. And the payload is XML. Okay, no ifs, no buts, it's XML. And as you can see here, XML is much more wordy than JSON. So like the previous example, creating an account, just curly braces and account name. This is what you have to send up the wire, or what the library sends up the wire to create an account with SOAP. So there's a lot more there, but it works really well. I mean, this is technology that's been around for probably 10 to 15 years. Now, SOAP, the Workbench actually uses SOAP under the covers. So if we go back and start clicking around up here and say, okay, let's insert some data. Oh, it starts working now. When did they change that in PowerPoint? It used to be when you flicked, when you changed focus, it would follow you. All right, so in Workbench, you say, okay, insert some data, and we can say, okay, give me an account, a single record, and because of the nature of the SOAP API, you're kind of insulated from what's really going on. So we can put in an account name here, and hit, say, confirm, comes back with an ID, and then over here, we can refresh, and we got that second account. In fact, I can't let this go now. I've got to go back and do this. Well, that's the darndest thing. It works from the browser, but not from the command line. All right. I'm fed up with troubleshooting that. But basically, we can do all of these same operations, but we're kind of like a step away from what's really going on compared to the REST Explorer. But it's still useful. This is using the PHP toolkit. All right. So, from Java code, again, it's a little bit more wordy. You go through creating an object in memory, setting up the fields, creating it via the connection, and then examining the results to see what actually happened. And the great advantage of the SOAP API, and despite my dissing SOAP and XML all the time, this is what I actually use when I code in Java against Force.com. It's really well supported by that Java Web Services connector. You never actually, in normal circumstances, need to see that underlying XML. You can if you want. You can turn on debugging flags, but most of the time you just operate on that Java API and it just works all day, every day. Really super reliable. If you don't have a SOAP library in your language of choice, sending and receiving those raw XML messages is really not fun. Similar scale limitations to the REST API. So queries, 50,000 records. Create is 200 records. Now, if you want to move beyond REST and SOAP in terms of scale, then the bulk API is where you have to go. The bulk API scales to literally millions of records, and I don't mean literally figuratively, I mean literally. The downside is it has an asynchronous model, okay? If you send 1 million records up to Salesforce, what actually takes the time is inserting those in the database rather than sending them over the wire. Okay, you can send 1 million records to Salesforce in a second or two, but actually Salesforce inserting them is going to take some time. So what happens is you have this API where you create a job, and then you can send batches of data for that job. Say you're creating accounts. Then you have to close the job. And then you have to periodically poll, so ask Salesforce, hey, is my job done yet? Is my job done yet? Until Salesforce says, hey, your job's done. I inserted 990,000 of those million records, and here's the 10,000 that had errors for some reason. Now, if you want to work with the bulk API, again, it's supported through the web services connector, and there are other options on GitHub. Again, the Force.com toolkit for PHP, and I actually wrote some JavaScript called bulk.tk, so you can use the bulk API from a Visualforce page. Sometimes people want to do that kind of thing, like actually insert large numbers of records from the browser. And when you're working with the bulk API, here's the Java interface. Again, operations are exposed as methods. So you create a new job. You say, I'm going to work with accounts. I'm going to be inserting them in CSV format. Let's create the job. So we kind of go through this kind of code, and if you like the control plane, the instructions you send are in XML, but your payload can be XML or CSV. So it's very convenient. Almost any tool can generate comma-separated values, CSV, so Excel, for example, and you can just send that straight up with the bulk API. And again, Workbench gives you an interface. You can go to utilities and create a bulk job, upload a CSV file, and you get quite a lot of information on what's going on. So the fact that it took 200 milliseconds for this query to run is probably related to the fact that I only had 3 records. Now, in terms of Java code, this doesn't really do it justice. So let me get it right this time when I flick to my next screen. So if we go to the bulk API, there's a lot of code involved in writing like even 10 records. So this is based on the examples in the documentation with one key difference. I never put credentials in code. Okay, forget about Workbench. If you take one thing away from this session, never put credentials, usernames and passwords in your code, because bad things happen. You send a code example to somebody and they get your password. You put code on GitHub and the world gets your password. Okay, so take the time, put them in the environment variables and get them from the environment rather than just dropping them straight into your code. It takes like 2 minutes longer. And then you can show your code to hundreds of people. But anyway, so to use the bulk API, we've got to get a connection, we've got to create a job, we've got to create batches of data, reading it in from a CSV file, we've got to create batches from streams, we've got to close the job, we've got to wait for the job to finish, and then we've got to check the results. So that's like 250 lines of code to do what took about a dozen lines of code with the SOAP API. But there's a huge payoff, because if you're working in this kind of scale, this is the only game in town. And I actually checked, I was going through my slides last night, and this slide used to say 50 million records, and they increased the limit in Winter 17, so you can now write 100 million records in a single bulk API job. And if you need to do more than that, then I'd really like to understand your use case. So you basically end up writing 10,000 batches out of 10,000 records, and on the query side, it's limited by the amount of data, so up to 15 gigabytes of data. And if you're going beyond that, well, you need to reformulate your query so you can do multiple queries to get your whole data set. And the big drawback is, you could see from that 250 lines of code, that's a minimal sample for the bulk API. It's way more complex than REST or SOAP, but to be fair, it's really only as complex as it needs to be. All right, so people who are long experienced with the APIs can wake up now, because I'm talking about Wave Analytics. So Wave has the external data API for uploading data sets. Now, in their wisdom, the Wave team decided they wanted their own API, and it's kind of different. You create S-object records, this Insights external data part, via REST or SOAP, because you're just creating records in Salesforce, and then you put the data in there as base64 encoded CSV, and then you set the action field on the external data record to start the job, and then you poll it to monitor completion. It's kind of a bit weird, but it works. And if we look at the code, it's kind of the similar amount of code to the bulk API. It's just a different flavor. So we create this job, we create the parts, so reading in CSV data, we tell Wave to start processing the data, and we poll to see if we're done. So still almost the same code, 220 lines of code to get some data up into Wave. But again, if you're working with Wave, it's the only game in town. Now, one of the advantages here, that if you're an existing Force.com developer, the techniques of creating one record for the job and then creating a bunch of records for the data as you upload it are pretty familiar and easy to use. If you're not a Force.com developer, or you've got developers you're working with who need to upload data that aren't, it's kind of weird to upload data using by creating S-object records, in my humble opinion. All right, so 5 minutes from the end. The bonus. There is, so we upload data into Wave. We can go and do those beautiful blue line charts. But how do we actually kick off analyses in Wave? How do we combine data sets? You can do this using the Wave UI, but there's an internal API that is officially undocumented, but there's an open source Analytics Cloud datasets utils tool on GitHub that effectively shows us how to use these. So we can list the data flows, the operations in Wave that are altering our data. We can define them via JSON, and we can even run them programmatically. And this uses a REST interface. It's pretty easy to use. Sorry, the URL's a little bit small. You can get the slides afterwards, but we can list the data flows, we can get the JSON, and so on. And we can even do this via via Workbench. So our trusty friend here, we can go to REST Explorer and start saying, okay, give me, whoops, let's do a get rather than a post. Oh, I'm not logged into the right thing. Okay, you need to be in an org with Wave enabled. So let's go to Workbench. Any old dev org won't cut it. So into our REST Explorer, say let's list our workflow. So we can see in our results that we've got this sales edge workflow, and we can go on and say, okay, let's give me the JSON of that, and we can even get right down into the workflow definition and see like every little detail of this programmatically. Internal API, use at your own risk. My understanding that it will have an official release with different URLs down the line, but you can go have some fun. And again, the only option if you want to create and run a data flow programmatically, but it's officially unsupported and undocumented. So I've got about 3 minutes to show you this working. So what I've been doing for the past 6 months is working with a tool called StreamSets Data Collector for moving data around. So the main use case is things like log files going into Hadoop or Cassandra. But I wrote a Salesforce origin, pulling data from Salesforce, and a Wave Analytics destination. So we can read from Salesforce right to anywhere, read from anywhere right to Wave. So just for fun, let's hook them together. So in the rapidly diminishing number of minutes, this is my tool. I've got, this is going to read in data from one organization, one Salesforce org, using just a SOQL query, so a whole bunch of fields. I'm going to rename the custom fields to get rid of the Force.com funkiness. And these are taxi transactions. So I'm going to split the credit card transactions away from the cash ones. So the cash ones are going to have a card type set to not applicable. And then I'm going to run a little bit of code to say, looking at the credit card number, let's figure out whether it's MasterCard, Visa, Amex or whatever. Send the transactions off to different files based on the card type. Mask the credit card number because I don't want to send credit card numbers into Wave Analytics. So if we reset it, and let's press the button. Takes a second or two to start. What it should be doing is logging into Salesforce, and we can see that it's read 1,000 record, 2,000. It's writing them actually to 2 locations, so you see the number of output records is different. So I've just read 5,000 records, written them into Wave, and if I go to Wave Analytics and refresh, what I should be able to see is those transactions were created today, and I can go in, I can do all the beautiful Wave things. I can group them by credit card type, so I can see all my different credit cards. I can filter to take away the not applicable ones by saying payment type must be card. And I can do all those lovely Wave Analytics things once my data is in there. All right, so finishing on time, select the right API for the job. That's the moral of the story. If you're working with dozens of records, even hundreds of records, use the SOAP API if you have tooling. Super reliable, super easy. Use the REST API if you don't, if you're working from some funky language. Use the bulk API if you need to scale literally into the stratosphere. If you need like a record for every inhabitant of the US. Use the Workbench. It's a great tool. If for some reason you don't want to use it on the web, download it and deploy it locally. And if you want to try out moving data from different platforms, you can download and try out StreamSets Data Collector. The Salesforce integration should be in about a month's time. So it's going through code review right now. And there's the resources, Trailhead, if you've not taken it already, take the API Basics module. The documentation is actually very, very good for the different APIs, so definitely check that out. That Wave Analytics client, I actually put that together from several different chunks of documentation. If you want it in one file, you can go to bit.ly/wave-sample, and you can pull that down, and that's the URL for the data collector. So with that, I'm out of time. Thank you for your attention, and I'll hang around off stage and take any questions you might have. Thank you very much.